Okay, while we're getting the speakers mic'd up, and please take a seat, and we're going to also be joined online by several speakers. Mr. Taavi Rõivas, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, who's joining by connection, and Baiba Braže, the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy for NATO. So while we're just finishing with the mics, maybe we can get started, and I'm going to throw out some questions at the beginning. Maybe it'll save time afterwards, and you can think about this. This is a very important session. We've got about, well, in the program, we've got 45 minutes. So I reckon that's about maximum 30 minutes for our 5 speakers to make their points. And that will leave 10-15 minutes for discussion and questions. So actually, I'll leave my questions if everybody's all ready to go. The most important question probably to start off with is how the pandemic, what does it mean for the digital agenda for Greece and obviously for the EU digital agenda? Other questions I'm sure are going to be covered in your remarks. So let me welcome, thanks very much for joining us in person at the event, the Minister of Digital Governance of Greece, Kyriakos Pierrakakis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here. Let me start off by addressing the nucleus of your question, which is how the pandemic affected us. The pandemic acted as a catalyst. Most of the strategic decisions, most of the projects that we implemented had been decided prior to the manifestation of the pandemic, but in a sense we understood that what was a necessity, what was an outstanding issue before, the digitization of the state, which for us in Greece is especially something needed because of the fact that it has a significant cost on the Greek GDP. If you look at studies by the OECD in previous decades, the cost of bureaucracy, the administrative burdens, the cost of bureaucracy on other activities is significant. Prior to the economic crisis, this was estimated to be in the area of 6.8% of the then GDP, which was higher prior to the economic crisis. Thus, for us, it was something which was, I would say, a key issue in our pre-electoral program. We created a new ministry. The previous government had a digital ministry, but we created a new entity which had business process re-engineering and changing the relationship between the citizen and the state using digital technologies. This became a necessity because of the pandemic. And what we decided to do was to instrumentalize an already existing strategy and render it a means to battle the virus, because in a sense, we digitized interactions. We created the government portal, gov.gr. This was very much inspired by the UK model, by gov.uk. We started off a procurement process on a new ID card for citizens, as we have a former Estonian Prime Minister. Estonia was the model for us. The former Estonian President is actually an advisor to the Greek government on those topics. We created a government portal on digital skills, free for all, assembling material to begin with, which is freely available, and we plan to build on it further by adding further capacity building and further classes and coursework for citizens. We have, I think we're probably the only country, but we're certainly one of the few, if not the only, which did not move the auction for 5G because of the pandemic, for those countries which had not conducted the auction. On 5G, we have presented a unique model. The unique model is that we currently have a bill in Parliament through which we have decided to instrumentalize the auction process to create an ecosystem, meaning that the revenues of the auction will not go straight towards the budget in other countries or servicing the debt in our case, but a portion of it, 25%, will go towards the creation of a specialized venture capital fund, which will be investing solely on startups which have a thematic relevance to 5G on any vertical, startups in transportation, in health, etc. Thus, we understood that one of the key issues on 5G was not only to auction the frequencies, the spectrum, but one of the key gaps, if you look at Accenture studies or other studies conducted by EY, for instance, is that we will have 5G technologies next year or this year on certain places of the planet, but we don't really have the private sector, we don't really have those companies that are taking advantage of the technology to add value to the economic system. And thus we decided to boost that by creating a specialized VC. On top of that, we have decided not to auction 100% of the relevant spectrum, but to reserve certain portions and offer them up for free to startups, to research centers, to universities, in order to render the Greek public sector a laboratory, quote unquote, for the development of these companies. And in that sense, we understand that on 5G, the state needs to act as a catalyst in the creation of the ecosystem. And we understand that this is one of the key technologies moving forward. Now, as I said, we have a bill in Parliament right now. It's called the Digital Transformation Code. It's probably the biggest in size bill presented by this government in the Hellenic Parliament. It tries to codify, add up, and bring and introduce new policy approaches. One new policy approach is this, how to roll out 5G. Another new policy approach is not so new in other countries, is the introduction of a unique number for citizens. Estonia has this. It's a unique ingredient of the new ID system. And thus we try to do many things at once. We try to make a simpler law for IT and telecoms. We try to resolve outstanding issues for decades by introducing one number instead of many. And we try to open up ourselves to new technologies, to the emerging technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, such as 5G, by introducing a unique approach. And in that sense, one of the countries which is perceived a quote-unquote laggard, or was perceived a laggard by international indices or international studies, we have showcased, I think, that during the pandemic and now, that not only in the biblical sense, sometimes the last shall be first. A country which is not a digital frontrunner can proceed with advancing a unique approach on 5G. A country which is not a digital frontrunner advanced a unique approach during the lockdown by introducing an SMS-based system for getting the permits to exit your home. This was accepted by the OECD as, in a sense, a digital innovation, even though it was something extremely simple technologically. We developed it within a day. And obviously, cybersecurity, touching upon one of the core issues of this discussion, is also a necessity. It's not one of those things which you publicize a lot, but it's one of those things that you need to do silently. Thus, in the law that we have placed in Parliament, advancing a cloud-first strategy for the Greek public sector is for us a priority, because we understand that protecting data and organizing data is a necessary condition for securing data and securing access to it. And obviously we're doing many other things which I would be delighted to present in the context of the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for helping us out with time, and that's a really succinct summary, I think, of some of the really innovative things that Greece has done in recent months. So let me turn immediately to Taavi Rõivas, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, who's joining us by connection. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm handing over to you to make your introductory remarks.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and believe me, I would love to be in Athens. This is the problem of the current times, that traveling is not always possible. But having said that, this is also one very good example how technology is bringing us closer, because I believe it was everywhere in Europe and the world where meeting across video bridge became a new normality, and thus it doesn't matter so much anymore whether you work from Athens or Agios Nikolaos, which is, by the way, my very favorite holiday destination in the beautiful Crete island. So, of course, I agree with Mr. Minister that the COVID pandemic has been an accelerator. Before that, it was a question of culture or question of how you prefer doing it in respect of providing public services. Now, with the COVID, digital became in many cases the only option. And thus, of course, for us Estonians who culturally are often joked not to like to meet the other people, which probably is true a bit, but for us it was also very comfortable because we have the ID card and digital identity widely used in the society, as Mr. Minister explained. and that actually gave us much better opportunities to act like business as usual, even though we had to stay at our homes for over a month. Now, when we talk about digital development in public services, I think the pandemic showed us the necessity for e-education, e-health, all sorts of information-based services to be provided to citizens remotely. And none of those, in my understanding, is possible without the proper digital identity and proper digital tools for that. And of course, as one of the questions for the panel was, where would Europe be heading? I do hope that at some point I can come to Athens or Aias Nikolaos with my Estonian digital prescription and use it in the pharmacies, just like I'm currently using it in Estonia or in Finland, which is a pilot cross-border usage. Second point I would like to make is that obviously COVID impacted both Estonian and Greek economies. We are both very much dependent on tourism, and there is no question that tourism was hit terribly, and several other sectors as well. And of course, this is a serious matter. But what I have seen and what has been very impressive is that a lot of sectors are actually boosting. And now the question is whether Greek and Estonian and other small countries can adapt fast enough to make this new economic growth possible. I know that later this week there will be contactless, driverless buses driving around in the Greek city of Lamia, which is, I believe, around a bit more than 100 kilometers from Athens. And this is one good example that shows that actually contactless can bring new innovation to our streets. And I think Greek government and Greek people should be very proud that you are among the very first to implement this. And why I know it, of course, is because these buses are made in Estonia. So this is one of our very good cooperations, hopefully a success story. So with that, I conclude my remarks, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So let's turn to our next speaker by connection, Baiba Braže, the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO, who I'm sure also is going to focus mainly on the security dimension of all these issues. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much for inviting me and having me. That is a pleasure. And just as the former Prime Minister said, I wish I was with you in beautiful Athens. It's been a while, and I look forward going next time. Yes, you are right. I will speak mostly about the defense and security. It was very interesting to hear what Greece is doing, and I think that development is most welcome, and congratulations, Minister, for the commitment, your government's commitment, and all the work that you are doing. On our side at NATO, obviously, we see the world also from the security and defense side. Already in 2014, NATO announced at the Wales summit that cyber defense becomes part of the collective defense and is a domain of operations. So as the threats, and we know that threats from external and various state and non-state actors become more serious, more advanced, and more varied, we all have to realize that digital development, the development of our economies, the health of our societies, and the future of it very much depends on the ability of all of us to defend against those threats. Those threats can be just below the so-called Article 5. They don't have to be attacks. They are in that gray zone. In that gray zone where you don't necessarily know right away who is doing that, so attribution is very difficult. But what we have done at NATO and what the allies have done, as NATO is both a military and political alliance, is both to include the cyber defense as part of all our operational planning, as part of missions and operations, to ensure NATO's own network security and defense, and also to lead on both the awareness, the training exercises, and thus giving the skills and the knowledge to both the military civilian sides of NATO and the allies. But also as political alliance, we have committed to so-called cyber pledge in 2016, which means that all allies, including Greece, Estonia, and all the 30 allies have committed to ensure that there is resilience in our countries, and that resilience is the resilience of networks, resilience of both the government and private sector, the resilience of communications, infrastructure, hospitals, government continuity, and various other aspects. So there is a very clear political commitment to make sure that all of our countries, and that is not only governments, but also the private sector and civil society, is aware and able to defend against these threats. It is not easy, and there are different levels and different abilities to defend, but again, it's very clear that politically NATO is leading in this, and in that respect, we do have to understand that all the digital development, everything that we do to make sure our economies work, do depend on how strong and how resilient we are also in cyber defense.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And I hope you're going to stay on for the discussion, and we will have questions. We will have time for that. So I'm going to turn now to, we're going to have a perspective, I guess, from academia and from the university, and also from the business world as well. And obviously these developments are very relevant from both those angles. So please try and keep your remarks short, and then we will really have time to come back and follow up with questions. So first of all, Kostas Axarloglou.
Good evening. Thank you, Joanne, for the invitation. A few quick remarks. First, we all agree that the pandemic really accelerated digital transformation in all aspects of our life, including the public sector, the digital transformation of the companies, and the digital transformation in that way, if I may use the expression, of our life. We now communicate digitally, we transact digitally, we travel digitally to some extent. So that was really an accelerator of digital transformation, the pandemic. The second aspect, which I think is also very important, is that this particular pandemic, in the back of digital transformation is technology, and technology by its nature is disruptive, and the results of the technological change are exponential. The changes go fast. This particular pandemic is a typical example of a disruptive phenomenon that touches everybody. There is nobody who left aside of this particular disruption. Why this was important also was primarily because we all of us, no exceptions, had the chance to see what technology can do and what are the limitations of technology. There was, before the pandemic, there was a big discussion about machine versus the humankind. Now, the pandemic gave us the opportunity to see the limitations of technology and to see also what technology can do. Another point, which I think is very important, managing the pandemic, we switch focus from skills to attitudes. Having the right attitude is the way to manage the pandemic, and that's what the experience is all about. That's exactly the case with digital transformation as well. What digital transformation does is changes focus from competencies and skills to attitudes. And in that way, I would say that the education system is very important because the education system develops attitudes of its students, of all of us, not to mention competencies and skills, but primarily attitudes. And when I say attitudes, I'm talking about the ability to adapt to new situations, the way to learn fast, the way to know what to do when we don't know what to do, because we know what to do, since what we need to do is to learn. I hope that I didn't confuse you enough, but a system or an attitude towards learning. And that, I think, is very important because we all realize that nowadays, in the era of a pandemic, where things are changing as we speak, and we don't know what tomorrow is gonna come up, being able to identify the sources of the causes and being able to understand the phenomena quickly and being able to manage the phenomena is the way to go. So the bottom line of all this is that we live in a world that constantly evolves, touches everybody, and being able to adapt to the new world is extremely important. Flexibility and agility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Nikos Babalis, Chief Information Services and Transformation Officer at Wind Hellas. Do you want to give us your thoughts on this from the perspective of your industry?
Right. I think representing the business, but particularly representing the telecom sector, I would like to give you a flavor of how we felt this pandemic and the implications from the inside. On one hand, we were just an ordinary company that we had to accelerate our digital transformation within a few months, while at the same time we had to ensure that the basic telecommunication services that we provide to our customers, we had to ensure that they were stable, they had the capacity because the demand actually exceeded all expectations, and we had actually to make sure that our customers, under a period of severe strain, they were served in the most effective way. I feel very proud of the sector and how we actually rose to the occasion and we managed to provide the services. I would like to highlight the excellent support and cooperation we had from the government and the ministry with all these excellent ideas. I think it was a unique idea, the SMS thing, and how we worked together collaboratively to support our society. So, I mean, from my perspective, I would highlight 2 points. First of all, digital transformation. Each and every company they had to accelerate in a few months. Looking back, I mean, you're amazed how much we could actually achieve within a short period of time. I think that's a good management lesson when we discuss about timelines of transformation. This is really insightful. And then, on the other hand, as far as the telecoms are concerned, I think this is a fundamental infrastructure for the society, and I believe it may be pivotal as well when it comes to the economic development in a wider sense.
Okay, great. Thanks all of you very much for keeping to the time. That means we can have some questions and discussions. So I've got quite a few questions, and obviously feel free, all of you and our 2 remote connections as well, to comment on anything that you've heard. So the first question for the Minister in particular is, you know, you've had you yourself emphasise, we've just heard the pace of change has been very rapid in recent months, and in that sense the pandemic has been an accelerant. So what are the next steps, and how are you going to kind of keep up that pace of change? How are you going to develop an innovation culture here in Greece that perhaps you haven't had in the past? There's a couple of other questions related to some security matters as well, because the pandemic has also been an accelerant in the context of this tech rivalry between the US and China and the broader geopolitical rivalry between these 2 great powers. Do you think there's a danger, a risk of a bifurcation of tech in this context, you know, as we see over the 5G and the decisions that are being made about Huawei and so on? Do you think that is a danger, and would that be a bad thing, do you think? So there's those questions to consider. Should we care, actually, where a consumer internet company was founded, a company, for example, like TikTok, which has established itself in the US market and is now, facing under threat from the US administration. I mean, it's hardly likely to be the first time that a strong overseas company is going to become strong in the US market. And obviously we can see the same thing in Europe as well. So should we see that as a problem? So those are a few questions to start off with. Maybe, Minister, you'd like to come back on some of those or comment on anything that you've heard from the other panelists?
Well, I think that the key question is, how do you keep up the pace? And the answer is tautological: by doing it. You keep up the pace by keeping up the pace. This is, in a sense, the mandate that we have by the Prime Minister. This is the mandate that we have by the broader population. And in a sense, this is exactly what we need to do. We shouldn't have needed overall the pandemic to transform, but for us, it's useful in the following sense. The pandemic acted as a demand catalyst. The demand catalyst meaning for new digital services because of the necessity. Other things that previously we would have needed to aggressively push, now they were asked by the broader public. And thus there was no necessity to hold a debate for certain issues. They were just needed and we just provided them. We will keep up the same pace. We fully understand that, in a sense, any word that has tele as the first part of it, teleworking or any telemedicine, etc., has been introduced to our daily lives. That's what we understand, is that we need to push forward very aggressively. We're doing it institutionally with the law that I mentioned. The next generation package and the overall funds that the EU will present and will be offered to us, both on the green and the digital front, will be used by us. We have conducted the gap analysis. We will be presenting our digital transformation strategy. We call it the Digital Transformation Book. This will be presented next month. It has an innovation. The innovation is that it will include per sector the various projects that we will be doing one by one in the next 5 years. And apart from that, we understand that we need to do capacity building in the public sector as well. Because you mentioned culture. We don't necessarily need, the innovation culture exists in Greece. The innovation culture exists in the private sector, it exists in companies, it exists in an emerging startup ecosystem. We need to infuse this culture, the public sector, with this culture. But what we're seeing, I mean, one of the things that we are introducing in legislation is that we will be advancing awards for public servants who will be giving us new ideas. I have to say, many of the ideas that we're implementing on new digital services, not necessarily the what, but typically the how, is being introduced to us by innovative public servants. And we want to further catalyze their actions, their ideas, their approach, and open up our doors to them. Now, on the technological competition front, I mean, in a sense, one of the luxuries of having a big problem is that you don't have to deal with problems that are ahead in the path on a daily manner. Meaning that for us, the key question on 5G was never the technological question. The key question was, how don't we miss that train? Because typically there is a phrasing in Greek since the 80s that Greece should not lose the IT superhighway, we should not lose the IT train, as we said in Greek. And we lost it. We shouldn't be losing this one. Thus, we're following the European path on this. The European path is a risk-based approach on 5G and the procurement process of 5G. It's the decision of the telecom sector, but it's a decision which is governed by a risk-based approach rather than any other approach. And for us, the key parameters of the question are not parameters of technological sovereignty per se. They are parameters of technological acceleration and how we will be rolling out the network as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. Just one follow-up then. You say that Greece does have an innovation culture and a private sector that is quite innovative. just need to create that in the public sector and encourage that too. What about universities? Do you think universities are in trouble in this pandemic? I mean, we've seen different approaches in different countries. You know, in the UK, the government's provided a lot of funding for the university sector. That's not maybe happening in the US, where, you know, universities have played a really important role in innovation. So what about in Greece? What's your view? What is the role of the universities here?
There is a positive change culturally in the university system vis-a-vis entrepreneurship and innovation. We have seen it in the last 10 years, but not to the extent that we needed. We needed to a much higher extent. And I mean, in a sense, one of the reasons why I mentioned before we're opening up the spectrum for companies that are going to be produced by universities, research centers, and the startup ecosystem is that we want to engage with universities and we want to see more spin-off companies out of the research conducted in the Greek universities. We have a culture of research. We have many Greek universities participating in the Horizon program, but we don't have applied research and as many spin-offs as we would have liked. So the answer to your question succinctly is it's something that we see, but we need to see it in a much larger extent.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me turn now to Mr. Roivas, just, I guess, to put the same question to you that I put to the Minister. Given Estonia's experience, your own personal experience, I mean, how do you keep up the pace? You know, what are the most important things in terms of spurring change and advances in this sphere? What advice would you have for Greece?
Well, I think Mr. Minister mentioned it quite correctly, saying that a lot of it is political and explaining that there is a strong mandate by Prime Minister to go and innovate. And I think this is very, very important because technologically, most of the things that we need to do is no rocket science in 2020. This can be done in any country. But most countries in the world don't do it because of political reasons, and thus I think it's very important that Greece has this political drive and political demand for innovative services. Now, if I can just mention one thing that needs to be adopted, again, something that Greece is already working on, from Estonian experience, electronic ID, which is widely used by every citizen from once you turn 18 or 16 until very, very late years of your age, this is absolute necessity. We couldn't imagine e-commerce, another very important thing during this pandemic, without access to your wallet, remote access. Without credit cards, without internet payments, e-commerce wouldn't be possible. Now, how can we provide distant services or over internet services to our citizens if we don't have a secure way to make sure that the citizen is who he or she claims to be over internet without actually showing up and showing your physical passport or ID card to the public servant. So if I have to mention only one thing, this is giving all the citizens the digital identity and giving them incentives to use it.
Thank you very much. And let me turn now to Ms. Braže. Did you want to come back and comment on anything you've heard so far? And maybe on this particular point about how growing superpower rivalry between the US and China is going to impact on this whole sphere. And I mean, you're not representing the EU, you're representing NATO, but nevertheless, it'd be good to hear your view on how this is going to impact on Europe and on nation states who may be forced to make difficult choices.
Let me start by reverting to what Greek Minister for Digital was saying about the knowledge and education on digital and skills. That is the very point. The knowledge, the expansion of knowledge, the early education.
Yeah, we lost you in mid-flow. I'm very sorry about that. So,
can you hear me or not?
I can hear you now if you want to finish your remarks, and the session will have...
let me just finish, yes, so that it's round up and is not hanging in the air anymore.
Yes.
So again, on the 5G, so we have to look, we have both at the positive sides of the 5G, but also how to ensure the critical infrastructure, network security, telecommunications, where the ownership issue does not create threats for our societies. So it's not so much as a choice between the US and China, but as a conscious decision by the allies, the alliance, and also the EU, which of course is carefully looking at it, that what is the best for us, for our businesses, societies, and how to harness it. Having said that, obviously, the issue also is about the state aid and state support, and we have clearly seen that certain companies have been supported, including Chinese companies, have gained a very large state support. So when we speak about level playing field, and there is an issue about pricing and access to 5G, the European countries are not allowed such state aid and state support. So they might seem to be more expensive, but if they were competing with, for example, a Chinese company at the same, on the same level, at the same regulations, not necessarily they would be expensive or have more difficulties entering the markets and being competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. So just very, very brief final points, literally 1 minute, I guess, if you would like to just identify what you think is the most important priority now in terms of taking this digital and agenda forward for Greece. Let's start with you, Nikos.
All right. I think 5G is actually a significant enabler for the digital transformation. I mean, the government, I understand, they will just crack on with their digitalization agenda, which is fantastic. I think it's very positive that the government has created a two-stage lever to accelerate 5G with the way they have designed the auctions so that you don't need to front-load the purchase of the spectrum. So you have monies to invest in the networks, which is fundamental. We have seen failures in the past with 3G in Germany, in the UK, and so forth. So this is a very good thing that we avoid this trap. Further, the venture capital is a fantastic idea because that will spur innovation. And I believe what we need in this country is more free enterprise and free market. I think that's above everything. If we focus on enabling free market and entrepreneurship, then things will be great.
Thank you very much, Mr. Axarloglou.
Well,
you have to go, I know, so, but very briefly.
1 minute.
Yeah.
I'm the only one who was very happy with the loss of power because it really identified and highlighted my points, I think, which is a disruption that happened unexpectedly. I'm coming to the Economist conference for years now. That's the first time it happened. It happened abruptly. It had tremendous results because we lost everything, right, besides humans, but also highlighted the reaction of all of us and the element of attitude. We saw immediately the crew trying to solve the problem. Our remote panelists, they stay where they are. Joanne immediately changed the agenda, being agile enough to put a different progress, and we are now back on track. That's exactly what disruption means, and that's exactly what it means to have the right attitude to manage a disruption. It might happen in the next minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Minister, final word to you, if you want to leave us with a final thought about what's on your agenda for the rest of this year and into 2021.
Unfortunately, it's not only one big thing, but it's many small things. And that makes it more difficult to track. I mean, we have, as I mentioned, streamlined certain things like the 5G auction process, the new law, the digital transformation book, or a series, gov.gr, etc. If I had to point out one thing, it's in relation to what the former Prime Minister of Estonia said vis-a-vis the ID cards in Estonia. We have initiated the procurement process for the new ID cards in Greece. We will have the new ID cards similar to the ones that Estonia has in less than 2 years from now. But in a sense, the ID acts like a key. The room is digital. It's what you digitize, it's what you create. It's a secure key in order to guarantee secure services, But in a sense, the ball is on our court to digitize as many services as we can up until then, so that this scheme has indeed a very big room to enter. So if I had to point out the key priority, it's new services added on the government portal every single week, and if possible, every single day.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all our speakers, including our two who joined remotely. Thanks very much for your remarks and for joining the discussion today. And I'm
thank you,
going to hand
Economist,
over.
for hosting us, and thank you, Greek government, for such encouraging news, and great to see our neighbors all across the world. Thanks.
Super, thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to Daniel now for the next session, but thank you, all of you again.
Thank you.